So one of the biggest questions I see from new Teachers Pay Teachers sellers is how long does it take before you can actually make some money online selling teaching resources? Now, I do feel there are quite a lot of unrealistic expectations that are being shared online where people are making it out that, you know, you can make money really quickly, you can make a lot of money, thousands of dollars and things really quickly right away. And, you know, in a lot of cases, that's just not how it actually goes. So today I wanted to share my sort of journey and what it was like for me when I first of all started out building my own TPT store, how long it took me to make a substantial amount of money, and hopefully answer that question if you're starting your new Teachers Pay Teachers store just now. So my name is Gemma if you're new here, and I run Crayon Lane Teach, which is the name of my Teachers Pay Teachers store, and everything else that goes along with it. So first of all, I kind of wanted to give you a little bit of an example of what my TPT journey was like when I first of all started. Now, just because this is how my sort of growth and journey happened doesn't mean that this could be like this for you. I would kind of say as well that I wasn't someone who grew massively, and I'm not somebody who also took forever to kind of get traction. I kind of think I kind of sit in the middle a little bit. And so because of this, I do kind of feel that my sort of journey is maybe quite typical to quite a lot of new Teachers Pay Teachers sellers. So as I mentioned before, I started in January 2020, which was right before COVID. So I do think that that definitely affected a lot of my growth, but I also think it had a negative effect as well. So maybe those kind of things balanced out, not quite sure. So when I first of all started, I did spend a lot of time creating resources. That is what I was focusing on. To be quite honest with you, it was because I didn't really know that much about email marketing, any other forms of marketing, blogging, anything like that. Didn't even cross my mind. I was just purely focusing on creating resources. And I do think that was a good thing. I do think that was something that I had to do to build up my store, to make sure I had enough resources in my store so that people came and weren't coming to an empty, you know, TPT store. I was also quite lucky because right at the very beginning, I want to say, I think it was like my second or third resource that I made. I did make a Pinterest pin for it. Now, when I say I made a Pinterest pin, I did not make a specialised pin. I literally took, I think, a screenshot of the actual activity and then pinned it, I think, if I remember correctly. So it wasn't anything fancy at all. And that pin went quite viral on Pinterest. So I do feel like a lot of my growth and a lot of my initial traffic to my store, I can kind of owe to that. And as I said, COVID did help as well. And like, as I said, at first it didn't, because obviously we weren't in schools. There was not much of a need for worksheets and things that you needed printed off. Everything was online. However, it became quite clear that a lot of teachers and parents wanted stuff that was online, and I sort of learned how to show how our resources could be used online so that those things sold. So that really helped. And we did get to a point where I think a lot of schools, including the school that I was at, did want printed off homework packs to be sent home to the kids, like actual physical copies. So obviously my resources were quite useful for that. I actually sent them home to my own kids because I think I had primary 1 during COVID, is that right? During COVID, primary 1. So they would have been like 5, really young, and obviously that was the resources I was making anyway. And obviously that would be really helpful to actually send off ready-made printed activities home to the kids and their parents, so they didn't have to worry about logging on and printing it off themselves and, you know, figuring out how to do something on the computer and all that. So I do think a lot of my sort of early success was due to that as well. So next we're going to talk about why your first sales might feel like they're taking longer than what you expected. So first thing I want, you know, obviously to make clear is that even compared back to when I started, new TPT sellers are competing with so many different resources. Now, you've got resources on TPT that have been up there for years, that have got, you know, lots of reviews. They've got a lot of kind of trust built into them because so many teachers have bought them. Then you've got a load of resources up there which are probably made with AI that are just clogging up, I think, clogging up the TPT feed. I do know they're trying to crack down on it, but there is still a lot of stuff on there. And even though your resources will probably be better than those, they're still kind of getting in the way, if you know what I mean. They're still just clogging up the search. And then obviously you're competing with loads of other teachers who are maybe newer or have been doing it for a little while, who are obviously just selling their resources. So you're competing with quite a lot of different sellers, quite a lot of different resources, and obviously you're really, you're trying to get your thing seen. And it's quite difficult. And even if your resource is fantastic, even though you've used it in your classroom, you know it's amazing, other people have maybe used it and they love it, there's still a few things that need to kind of happen before you're going to get consistent sales with your resources. First of all, you kind of need to build up trust with your new customers. So this could be through 1 or 2 people buying it, leaving good reviews. It could be through, if you are sharing it, doing a little bit of marketing and you're sharing, using it, sort of showing people how they could use it and things like that, getting people to know your face so that they trust you. And then even things like letting time for TPT to figure out the data on it. So obviously when you list a new resource, it's like when when somebody starts a new website, Google or TPT doesn't know anything about that resource yet. They don't know if people are interested in it. They don't know if people will click on it because they're interested. They don't know if they're buying it. They don't know if people who click on it are then buying it, which is like, the click-through rate. They don't know anything about it, and it takes a little bit of time for TPT's website to learn about your resource, and obviously to even look at things like keywords and your descriptions and your titles so that they know the right people to show it to. And it takes time, obviously, for TPT to learn all that, and especially if you are a new store. Because if you're a new store and you don't have any resources, they don't even have like a sort of audience that they would sort of automatically send your resources to when people search for things, because TPT as a website is still learning about you. And then obviously you need to allow a bit of time for teachers to find your resource, because again, if your resource is brand new, if you don't have many reviews, many resources in your store, it's not going to come top of search. And you need to allow a little bit of time for new teachers to actually find your stuff as well. Another reason why it might feel like it's taken a while to get sales is just because you might not have enough resources in your store, like what I mentioned earlier. Somebody who's got brand new store with only 3 resources, no followers, no reviews, is obviously going to find it quite a lot trickier to get sales than someone who's got, say, 100 products, a few reviews and a few followers. So building up your resource catalogue takes time. And as well, spending time learning what sells. And I know this is really tricky to hear, but you might spend so much time making a resource that you love the idea for, but if nobody buys it, it's almost a little bit, I wouldn't say it's a waste, it's definitely not a waste of time, because you're learning what doesn't sell, and it sort of teaches you not to make that anymore. However, it might take a few tries of you making resources to figure out what does sell, and then when you do learn what sells, obviously make more of that. But all that trial and error also takes time as well, and obviously sometimes it's just a little bit of luck. Now I want to talk about a few things that I feel like helped make my store grow and obviously helped get those first few sales. And this is really interesting because I've actually been doing a little bit of an audit on my TPT store, trying to figure out what stuff I really need to be spending time on and what stuff I can definitely let go. Have mentioned a little bit about this in previous videos, and some of it I already knew, but some of it's actually been really interesting. So one of the first things that I wanted to mention is Pinterest. So for me, Pinterest, when I mentioned that viral pin earlier, definitely helped my store grow. It is not an instant thing for me, and it's not an instant thing for most people. When you do pin a product or you make a pin for a few resources or whatever, you might be lucky and get a viral one, and obviously you get a lot of traction quite quickly, but a lot of the time you won't see the payoff for that at least a few months, maybe even a year or 2 down the line. But trust me, it is worth it. Like, it really, really is. Like, I've got pins that are now going viral or are now getting a lot of views, and I posted them maybe 2 years ago. So I would definitely really suggest doing Pinterest, because it's a long-term thing. It's not instant and then the content disappears like TikTok and Instagram and stuff like that. It's up there forever, and people usually when they're on Pinterest, especially teachers, they are scrolling for ideas. So they're in that that mindset of they're looking for activities and resources for their classroom. They're not just kind of scrolling it sort of for fun like what you might do on Instagram. And that's something that's really quite different is the buyer sort of mindset that's going on when they're on these different apps. Another thing that helped my store grow and let me get my first few sales, or at least get a sort of steady sales, was definitely, as I mentioned before, creating resources. So spending quite a lot of time building up my catalogue of resources, and once you do figure out what resources work, what the ones that sell really well, make more like that. Don't just kind of make random resources and think, oh, this might work, this might work. Once you have maybe even just one resource that's actually really taken off for you, think what other resources would work well with that. Can I make different versions of that same resource? Maybe a different theme, maybe a different difficulty, maybe a different sort of seasoning, making it seasonal, making seasonal versions as well is a really good idea. So yeah, definitely sort of really lean into the resources that are already showing that they're selling. And that's something that definitely helped my store grow as well, because you'll probably find on my store, if you do go and have a little look at it, I have, I want to say 3 core resources that I have so many different versions of. I've got 2 sort of literacy ones, 1 math one, and I've got so many different versions of that. And that is why I did that, was because those 3 resources were really successful. So another thing that really helped me get sales, which was a bit of it wasn't direct sales, but I do feel like it's helped, has been my email list. Now, I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with my email list. This is one of the things that I'm kind of looking at just now and figuring out how to tweak. So when I do look at my email list and I track the links of people who are opening my emails and then clicking through, looking at TPT's sort of data, it doesn't look like I'm getting very many sales from those emails. However, I'm getting a lot of click-throughs. But I do think there's a little bit of maybe people are clicking on my email, saving an item, and then coming back and buying it later, and then it comes up on the TPT traffic dashboard as being a direct sale rather than related to my email. I'm not sure. I'm sort of trying to figure out how to get down to this. However, my email list does direct lots of people to my blog, which is what I'm going to talk about in a little second, and I do get sales from that. So even though it's a little bit of a roundabout way, it is definitely something else that has helped me get sales and grow, the number of sales that I was getting definitely at the beginning. And then something as well, which I am going to be doing with my email list, because it's something that I didn't do before and I really should have, was segment my email list. So I've actually got 3 different email free opt-ins that are completely 3 different groups of teachers. And what I was doing was basically sending the same email to all 3 groups. And I know I shouldn't have been doing that, but I was, tight with time and it was better than nothing. So that is one of the things that I'm going to be doing, is I'm going to be making my emails more targeted and segment my email list and make sure that I'm sending particular emails to particular groups of people so that there is more interest, and that will hopefully generate more sales. And then the last thing, which after sort of auditing my business, I found that really helped grow sales, was a blog. Now, I think I've mentioned this in a previous video about having long form content, whether that's a blog or even like a YouTube channel or just something that's a little bit longer lasting. And I definitely feel like a lot of my earlier sales and a lot of my earlier traffic, I can definitely lend to my blog, because I did do quite a lot of blog posts. I made sure the blog posts were related to things that were in my TPT store. I spent a lot of time with, doing keyword research, making sure that my blog had all that in it. Obviously doing Pinterest to direct people to my blog, as well as writing emails to direct people to my blog. And I'm still getting traffic from that now, and I still get sales from that now. So if you are able to start something that is a little bit more time consuming to market your store, I would definitely suggest doing a blog or even doing a YouTube channel, but maybe about what you might write in a blog, because that definitely led to quite a lot of sales. And I did this at quite near the beginning of my business as well. Next, we're going to talk about what you can realistically expect as a beginner TPT seller, sort of like depending on where you are, with your store. So definitely within the first few months, you are learning, first of all, how to create resources, how to upload them to TPT. You're learning what resources actually sell. You might be lucky and maybe a few of your very first resources actually are quite successful. Keep a note of that, make more of those, and you'll definitely learn which ones aren't successful and which ones maybe, aren't very popular. Don't say to take them down or anything like that, because it might just take a little while for them to gain a bit of traction, but you're definitely in your learning phase when it's the first few months of your store. You're probably getting quite inconsistent sales as well. So, one day you might get a few sales, you might go a few days with no sales. So it could be very, very up and down, just depending on, how many things you've made and, how popular they are. So when you kind of hit the 6-month mark and you're in your sort of 6 to 12 months of your store, you probably will be starting to experience more consistent sales. And I think that is the case with most people. Now, when I say consistent, I don't mean hundreds and hundreds or thousands and thousands of dollars. I just mean that you're getting consistent sales, whether it's one sale, a few sales, whether it's 20 sales a month, whatever it looks like, you probably will be getting consistent sales. So that is probably due to you sort of spending a bit of time building up your resources, learning what works. However, I do feel like that if you figured out a few resources that are really popular right away and you've created more of those, I do think there is a potential to actually really up your sales. So I wouldn't worry as well about, I think this is what I worried about at the beginning, was when I found a resource that worked, I was very, reluctant to actually make a similar resource to it in case people came across my store and thought, oh, she's just selling more of the same thing. I don't want that. Don't think like that. Think about if you are making more of the same thing, that's more like more chances for new people to sort of find you. And at the very beginning, that's totally fine because you want to be getting as many new people, as much eyes on your things as possible. That was something that I was worried about. Don't worry about that. It's totally fine to make, similar resources or different versions of the same thing, especially at first. And then once you hit your first year, hopefully you'll have a good catalogue of resources. Hopefully you'll have figured out definitely what resources are working and that you should be making more of and which ones aren't, and the ones that you shouldn't be making more of and just kind of, don't really make those again. You should also use this time to then really look at your data. Because if you've been selling for a year, you should have clear resources that are top earners, clear resources that have got really high views, resources that have got high click-through rates, and even if it's just a couple that you could be looking at, that is still really useful data, and that is definitely something that you should be looking at to kind of inform what you make next. So overall, I would say as well that when you're starting your Teachers Pay Teachers store, the goal at the very beginning, I don't think it should be, right, I want to make as much money as possible, or I want to, replace my teacher salary. That's obviously definitely a fantastic long-term goal, but I think initially making lots of little small goals at the beginning is probably the better, the better option. So I kind of wanted to share some of the things that I experienced just so you can see what it's really like in real life. So the first goal that I kind of wanted to talk about was obviously your very first sale. For a lot of people, that's such a fantastic feeling, especially if you've got the TPT app. You hear that cha-ching going off on your phone, it's amazing. So your very, very first sale is a massive milestone and should definitely not be something that you should just kind of brush over, because it means that somebody has found your resource, they've looked at it and they've decided they actually want to pay money for it, for something you've created, and that is actually such a fantastic feeling. So I wanted to share what my very first resource that I sold was, my very first sale, and it was for the item that actually went viral on Pinterest, which was like a place value activity, and I think I sold for, oh, I've actually lost the page, I'm looking at it on here, $2. So my very, very first sale, I sold something for $2, and that was my very, very first sale on TPT. So I've also just looked back at my very first month on TPT. So my earnings for my very first month was $33, which for me, I was so happy with that. I can't even remember, I think I literally had, if I remember right, I maybe only had about 6 resources, because I had that place value one I was talking about, and I also made a whole load of Valentine's resources and then put it into a bundle. So the next goal that I wanted to share was the first month that I actually earned over $100. So that was actually January 2021. So I had my TPT store for a whole year from January 2020, 2021, and I did not make $100 in a month. Now obviously we all know what happened in 2020 with COVID. I do think that had quite a lot to do with it. I might have actually done a bit better if we didn't have that going on. But yeah, for me, it took me a whole year before I earned over $100. I think it was $101 or something that I earned in January 2021. And then the next big milestone for me was making $1,000 in a month. And that wasn't until October 2023. So that was more than 3 years, 3 and a bit, nearly 4 years actually, from me starting my TPT store that I didn't make it took me to make $1,000 in a month. Now, I will say that for me, obviously my first year, COVID had a big impact on my store, I feel like. I also didn't work on my store consistently. So I did have big breaks within those kind of first couple of years where I didn't work on my store for months, and it was quite, it was quite stagnant. I wasn't really growing very much. However, it does show you that if I did put the work in, then I could have been earning $1,000 earlier than that. But for me, it took nearly 3 and a bit years, nearly 4 years to make $1,000 in a month. And now there are certain months that I do make well over $1,000, and there are certain months where I only make a few hundred, like for example the summer months, and then all the other months kind of land in between that, which I'm totally fine with just now, but obviously I would like to grow that. So that's just me being very transparent. That's what my kind of milestones looked like. Obviously everyone's journey is different. You might hit $1,000 way before 3 years. It might take you a bit longer. It just totally depends. If you are starting a Teachers Pay Teachers store, or you've already started one and you're quite new to it, I really hope this video is quite useful, because it does kind of highlight how different everyone's journey could be, but also what the realistic expectations should be when you are building your store online. Obviously the economy is very different from way back in 2020. As I said, I do think that helped but also hindered my growth. Obviously nowadays there are different things that could be helping or hindering your growth. Everyone's in a different position. So if you do want a little bit of a sort of starting a teacher business guide, I do actually have a free download that you can grab it below, and that might help you kind of get started with starting your teacher business. I also have a video that I put out a little while ago about if I was starting my teacher business in 2026, all the things that I would do now, and that might have a few helpful tips in it as well. So let me know below, whereabout are you in your Teachers Pay Teachers journey? Have you started your store? Have you been going for quite a while, or is it just something that you're just kind of thinking about? Let me know in the comments below. So if you found this video useful or interesting, make sure to subscribe, turn the notification bell for my future videos, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!